Have this juxtaposition of a human that we've then said, like, you need to be everything. And if you're not this on my one profile, I'm swiping right past you, instead of giving someone the chance of getting to know them, being curious about them, seeing if it's the right combination, and identifying, like, as Henry Cloud goes through this, is like, what are you looking for and why are you looking for it? Like, is it something in you that you're actually trying to overcompensate for, and you're just like, I need someone that will solve all of these problems because you're not going to God, your identity's not in God, or you're dealing with your own trauma and healing, and understanding that the way we've warped it in the world and culture in the last 50 years, we've changed what we look for in a spouse and put an entire world like burden on that partner.
Welcome to WWJT. What would Jesus tech? I mean, he was a single guy. He wasn't using dating apps. He wasn't dating, to our knowledge. Pretty sure he wasn't dating on Earth. I think that's an obvious, but yeah, he probably would have some guidelines to say about dating. I think some people say the Bible has nothing to say about dating at all. Don't worry, you can do whatever you want. That's not true. There are some good principles to guide us. So what are those principles? I'm joined as always by Joel Jacob, and I'm joined also by Ruth Cuthbert, who is a faith techie. Not just a techie, but a faith techie, because she works at Faith Tech. She's actually written on dating apps, and she's very well thought on this issue. So I'm super glad that we're having you on this podcast. Thanks for joining us, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So when you guys think of this sentence, I would like you to complete it. Dating apps are... Go.
The mobile version of online apps.
Oh, I was going to say a great way to meet people.
My answer to the question is that dating apps are like hamburgers and 2x4s, because there's a guy who did this video describing how hamburgers and 2x4s are similar because of the efficiencies, economies of scale, etc. And you'll see how it relates to dating apps, I hope.
To start, they both take advantage of a process that leaves very little waste, or they utilize materials that otherwise would have been waste. For hamburgers, it's ground beef, which is made from all of the offcuts from the butchering process. For lightwood framing, it has to do with getting usable wood members from a tree. You can think of prime cuts like a steak to be like big straight cuts of wood. But because trees are round and framing construction prefers square or rectangular members, there's a lot of excess. Cutting the trees into smaller parts allows you to take advantage of more of the tree.
Yeah. Okay, so I got it. It's like both of them are just examples of how things can be scaled. And, dating apps are a way to scale, connections. I think is kind of like the analogy here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the industrialization of it, for better and worse, right? Because I think dating apps are not a replacement of dating. They are rather a way to meet people and initiate dating. And the dating app is a way to make economical and efficient increases in potential dates. And it's all about that economical and efficient approach to things. And wood framed houses by 2x4s, it makes better use of the tree. And I think dating apps make better use of your time, optimizing it for meeting people. Because when it's the lunch hour and you're at work, you don't have the opportunity to meet brand new people. But with the dating app, you can. So I think people who just have this blind, I'll call it blind, because it's like, oh, dating apps are bad. Do you also believe that hamburgers are bad and like 2x4s are bad? Because those things were modern technologies invented to make more economical and efficient something that is good. It is a good thing to meet new people. It's a good thing to live in a house. It's a good thing to eat food. So that's kind of my introduction in a funny way into this idea that dating apps, they're not so bad, because there might be some stigma there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Ruth, what's your experience with this like stigma related to dating apps?
I think my background, my story is I have basically, I got married when I was 34, but I was single for 10 years before that. And so growing up in the church, and like I had one solid boyfriend in university, and then that ended. And then no one really dated in the church for a chunk of time because there was all this pressure around it. And so when I turned 30, I was like, okay, I need to need to be more proactive about this. I need to get online and start meeting people, because I just wasn't interacting with new people through my church, or like you said, like leaving the office. I wasn't leaving the office for lunch. And but it was something that the number of times I've logged on to an online app and then instantly deleted it is pretty high. Like I've done that many times, starting at 25 and then did it again at 30. And so there's a shame. And as I was writing these articles, I started to notice, I would bring it up and say, oh, I'm talking about online dating. And especially with women, I noticed they would start to, when they'd say, oh, you're brave. And then they'd say, like, oh, they wouldn't admit that they were also single and that they were looking and in the a battle, for lack of a better word, too. And I realized that there's a huge shame around at least women in their 30s that are single. I think there is a degree of shame around men in their 30s. And I'd say particularly in the church and probably older ages as well, I'm just not as exposed to it, that it's not often talked about. It's not something that's highlighted. People don't know how to respond to it. And so they're trying to fix you and set you up, or they just stop interacting with you because there's just nowhere to go. So it's a hard world. It was a long journey, and definitely had its highs and lows.
And there's even a shame, even with being single in some churches, that's so focused on the family. So then there's just like this setup.
Yeah. And one stat that just really rocked me, but made sense, was that the largest people group leaving the church right now are single women under the ages between 25 and 40. And that was something relevant pulled out from, I think, a Pew study a while ago. But that hit so deeply, because there's no place to go. Like, you can't go to young adults anymore. Young marrieds are building their family, and you don't really want to talk about babies and mat leave all the time. And then when you get older, like many of my friends have left the church and are single, just because, like, where do you go? Who do you connect with? You really have to decide to stay, as opposed to like want to be a part of something.
Joel, what about you? What's your experience with dating apps?
Yeah, I mean, I think even to start off, it's quite different. I think this is one of the technologies that I think is varied in its reception by culture. So I grew up in like an Indian Christian community, and there definitely was a shame of dating at all, and then once you graduate from university, the parents are like, okay, when are you getting married? And it's like, all of a sudden I went from like, you can't date, you just have to study. And then within like 1 month, it's like, okay, we need to find you someone, right, to marry. There's no like concept of like dating at that time. And I think probably it's not even like a Christian Indian thing. It's like more so an Indian thing, because I think Indians of different religions also have that same experience. And even before dating apps had come around, it is also more common to, have prearranged marriage and those type of concepts in the Indian community. So actually the way and perception of like matchmaking is a more common practice. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen, there's a show called Indian Matchmaking on Netflix, and like my wife really loves it actually. But it is cool and fun to see like different perspectives on someone going and like looking through all of the profiles and finding a match for you, which is, a different but similar model to what the dating apps have kind of done today, with now instead of like they took out the matchmaker and they allow you to see all the profiles. So for me, it was less of a shame concept when I saw dating apps. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is like similar to what is already common in our community. Actually, like I kind of made that comment about like, oh, mobile dating apps are just like the mobile version of online apps when you asked me that original question. It's because before these apps like Tinder first came along, we actually had websites, at least in like the Kerala, which is a South Asian state I'm from. There's a website called M for Mary. And I think there's one for like shoddy.com. And there's like all of these like Kerala matrimony. So
Match.
like all
.com was created in 1995.
Right. Yeah. So I think these,
Christian Cafe.
Yeah.
I did not know about Christian Cafe. So I feel like those definitely existed before. And it's those are almost an evolution of like the paper, just like handing out paper profiles back in the day in like older India. So
Well, and that was a thing. People would literally do this. There's old newspaper articles from like 100 years ago where people would be like, hey, looking for someone. Like you publish it in the newspaper, you start corresponding through mail, not email, mail, and then you engage. So it's to say that this is a new technology. Yes, it is, because just like, 2x4s, you had this industrialization that proliferated them. So too with this, that you have the internet, and the internet has changed the way we just generally interact with one another in so many ways. So when you have a culture that is delocalized, or you live in a city that by its very nature, as Wyatt Graham says, de-neighbors you because there's so many people in a presence. So it's almost necessary to have these other means of meeting people. And so this is where I said to a friend of mine who, he's in his early 30s, even if he was in his early 20s, and I'm like, yeah, use dating apps. Like, as long as you practice biblical principles and you think of yourself still as a Christian before God and how you use them, I think they can be used rightly, justly, and for the good of yourself and others, and for God's glory even.
And I'd add in, just on the shame and the stigma piece, there was a significant shift with COVID. So when the whole world shut down, I remember thinking, my dating life is now in purgatory. I am indefinitely single. How on earth? Like, we were legally not allowed to meet new people. We were told to stay within 8 people. But as a result, it forced everyone to go online. Before that, it was still a little bit like, oh, you're desperate if you're online, or you're really like looking to fit a need. But when everything shut down, it opened it up to everybody. So then even the people that were like, oh, maybe one day I would, but only if I really have to, it forced that. So then the variety and the options online became more real. And then I thought, like, I noticed there was a change in respect, because we were all in it together, as opposed to like, oh, you're also desperate like me, which is the wrong stigma to have. But I didn't realize how much I was carrying that until COVID switched it. And we were all like, how do we navigate this together? Like, what does it look like to go from a chat to a call to a webinar to an in-person hangout? That was an experience we all had to navigate. And then now it's just continued that evolution. So I think it actually, and there was times where I was like, this has actually worked out better for Christian men, because no one was asking, but they'd ask if it was online. And then they started to ask and start dating.
Yeah, I think we all love to have good stories to tell. And so you hear people of how they met, and it's so romantic, but it's never that romantic. We select pieces of our story. Like, I have 2 versions of the story of how my wife and I met, the version that I tell and the version that she tells, because there is this bit of like, well, I can select these pieces, and then there's the full story that includes all these bumps along the way. And it takes longer to tell the full story, but that's the reality of life. Joel, when people ask you how you met your wife, do you tell them?
Yeah, actually, well, yes and no. I think there's definitely, like, at least for a while, maybe when I was like more newly married, there's still shame and stigma. So I guess I met my wife online through a dating app to set the context. And, it was great. And I'm really happy it worked out that way. But now I feel like it's much more accepted. And then at the time, I feel like it was like I was one of the early people. So I met my wife, trying to figure 2016 or so. And at the time, I think Tinder was the main and only app. And it also had a stigma as, creating this like hookup culture, because there are people who'd be using it kind of just like hook up with people rather than to actually find a partner. So my wife was actually the first person I decided to like move from the conversation to the in-person meeting through that platform. So I was always intentional about it, but I feel like there was always a stigma. And I think the newer apps that have iterated on that model have like kind of thought about that and like said, how can we design it so it's like less stigmatized and like create features so it's like it feels more like people are in it for more pure purposes.
And so for Christians actually using dating apps and they're thinking about using them in a biblical way, how do we do that? So this is where, Ruth, I really appreciate how you've written on this, because you say profiles are people too. There's So like, how do we think about ghosting? How do we think about swiping someone's face? Like, there are really weird behaviors that are normalized through an app. So how should a Christian think about these things? How did you think about these things?
Yeah, it was a journey, and I talked about it a lot with my family and friends, that I was like, how do I do this well? And that's the reason I wrote the articles, is because I couldn't figure out how to do it from a Christian perspective, because everyone just said go online, as if that solved the compatibility options. And I was like, thanks, now I just have tens of thousands of people to filter through instead of like the 5 you think are really good fits. I think I was talking to Adam Graber, who's a part of the Faith Tech community. He's so helpful in helping me navigate how I related to the app. And he was my editor on the articles too, but he's like, in reality, when you walk into a room, you are still scoping out the people in the room, especially as a single person. And so like, you're checking if their style is similar to yours, if they're available by their rings, if they look engaging. And by that passive review, you then decide who you want to interact with in the room. So you are still having that natural response to a human in the room. So it's the same approach as you're on Hinge. It's just that you're given a face in front of you, and you then have to decide, what do you do? And so I think for me, it was understanding that when I decide to swipe away from someone and say I'm not interested, I had to ask myself, am I doing it because I'm being too picky? Am I doing it because, like, I had very strong criteria in terms of the faith that they were presenting, how they presented themselves, how they communicated, what values they were presenting back on their app. And then I would engage. But to the point of like, I kept asking my parents, I'm like, do you have a setup for me? Who can I marry? And so, yeah. But I would sometimes pass over my apps and just say, am I missing someone? And then just because I was so frustrated, and make my mom swipe through people because I was quite tight with my mom or my sister-in-law, and be like, who am I missing? Or my roommates? Because I was like, I'm getting to the point where I'm just like, nope. But if maybe someone else is able to see something I can't see because I'm just too jaded with the process. So yeah, so they're people. It's hard to not laugh sometimes. It's hard to not, but one of the other reasons of writing this article is, if you're online, have someone help you write your profile. Because then I started to look at profiles and think, maybe that's actually a really good person. They just don't know how to write about themselves. They can't take a good picture without someone helping them. And so and like, I've written profiles for friends and just been like, hey, this is who I see you to be. Run with that, because you saying it's not about me, or I really like to bowl, doesn't give me as the person looking in, it doesn't give me anything to grab onto. Like, leave something that's going to prompt a question, as opposed to like, I'm a cool dude. And you're like, cool. So I don't know if that's enough that I want to learn more about you. So there's a lot more to it, but I really monitored. I would take breaks, and I would have like comic relief moments with friends and crying moments with friends. Like, it was a journey.
I really appreciate how much you involved your community in it, even in a way honoring your parents with the decision. I think Paul in 1 Corinthians 7, he assumes in that passage that individuals choose who they marry, rather than the parents deciding. It's up to you as individuals, that you kind of have this freedom of choice, which then he goes on and talks about in 1 Corinthians 9, 10, 11. So you have this responsibility, freedom of choosing. You need to do it wisely. You might have less time for ministry if you get married, because you will justifiably be concerned about your spouse. So singleness isn't for everyone. But the reason I kind of bring some of these things up is because I don't know if sometimes we are necessarily thinking biblically about how to approach someone, how they are a human being. And so like ghosting, I think it could be justifiable sometimes when someone's rude to you. But I always feel bad if I'm on an email thread and I don't respond well. That's a human being on the other side of it. What am I doing to that person by just ignoring their question? And sometimes this leads me to answer too many emails than maybe I need to. But those are human beings. And rather than just ignoring it, why not acknowledge it? Similarly, like in prepping for this, I watched a couple of random YouTube videos of like Christian dating apps. And I'm very glad we're doing this podcast, because some of the advice out there, like this one guy's like, this is how I used it. And he like recorded himself literally within the first, this, he said, "Hey, what's up?" She responded. He saw that she was Catholic. So he said, "What do you believe is the role of justification by faith alone in becoming a Christian?" Literally, and he was like promoting this as like, this is what you should do. And I'm like, you would never do that to a human being in real life.
No. Or fourth question, how's your sex drive? On a Christian dating app from a Christian man. And I was like, okay, like we are not on the same page here, sir. Like, let's move on. Yeah, you need discernment. You need to, like, you're having a conversation with someone, and it just because it's an intentional, yes, you're looking for a partner, doesn't mean you take away all of the, like, hey, let's be friendly. Like, I want to know that you can relate in a comedic way. And ironically, I met my husband, it was a setup because of my articles. My coworker set us up, and he did lead with like all of the hard-hitting definition questions to the point, like on text message, to the point that I was very mad within 3 days of texting with him and was like, I'm done. I'm not doing this. And then I started to see his personality, and then it evolved from there. But the first 3 days were very iffy because he led, and because of my experiences online with men that had just berated me with their definition of the gospel, or like their definition of leadership roles and marriage definition. And I just was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I do not need to sit. And usually I was coming from my pain in these experiences over and over again, but it was also like, okay, thanks. This is not for me. I need to move on. But the other side of this is, if you don't, you are not responsible for their boundaries. So not in that like aggressively gospel throwing around, but if they can't handle a casual no, or like in one of my stories on dating, there was a guy that I just took 10 minutes to respond to a question, and he took complete offense and was like, I guess they're not interested. Like, I guess you're not interested. I didn't say anything wrong. And I was like, hey man, like, this is on you to manage. You need to manage your heart and your mind in this conversation. I am not responsible to make you feel totally seen through this entire conversation, because we're two humans responsible for ourselves. And if I'm feeling responsible for you in the entire interaction, I'm going to end up talking to hundreds of people all the time. Like, it'll never end, and I might not be interested in any of them. So it's very uncomfortable to end. And I wrestled with ghosting, and I probably did at some point, and just because the conversation got bored and they never showed more interest, and they ghosted on me, and I just kind of left it. But it's a real battle. And then my balance of it was like, okay, on LinkedIn, I don't respond to everyone, because I had people reaching out that I had no interest in, didn't want to hear from. And like, what do you do in those situations other than like, I'm sorry, man, I'm not interested in you? That's not always a kind response.
Yeah, I think on the topic of ghosting, like originally I had thought, oh yeah, that's like not nice and disrespectful. Like, people deserve to, be cordial with them. But then, if you start thinking about it in how it would have happened in the older world, if you were approached at, I don't know, I wanted to say at a bar, but put it to a more Christian context. If you're opposed at like a
why can't Christians go to bars, Joel?
A youth group can go to bars or something like that, and someone approached you and you never want to see him again, you didn't have to like find out who they were and like connect with them and be like, yeah, sorry, I don't want to talk to you again. You just never saw them again. So I think like depending on the level of engagement, I think like you can consider like ghosting as like normal and not and like non-issue to like, hey, that person does deserve, like, you have created this engagement and like they do deserve some like clarity on what's going on.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because then there's a difference between someone initiating a voicemail to you and you not responding, like you're spam because you didn't ask for that, versus like you've had text exchanges, then you might need to like close that out, versus you've had phone call exchanges. My way of handling it was, if I had talked to them in person, that I needed to say something in person to say like, hey, I don't think this is going anywhere, when I could, or on the phone call at minimum, just to like end that out. But yeah, when I think of ghosting, I think of like the 1 to 3 text chats that have happened, not like I've been hanging out with them for 3 weeks and then I peace out. Like, we need to have a conversation. That's not fair to anyone.
Yeah, because the dating apps are meant to be a transition, and just like Hinge's advertising, it's like the app that's meant to be deleted. Like that truly should be how a Christian approaches it, because we have a view towards love and God's glory and the fidelity of marriage, as opposed to, not for all people, but for people who end up in that situation as God allows. Yeah, you have a role towards that, not towards lust and hookup culture. And so this is the question that Ruth, you brought up earlier, is you got to figure out your own heart in the process and be responsible for it. Involve yourself in your community, as Proverbs would speak about getting counsel from others. And that's what wisdom is not simply taking biblical rules rigidly and independently applying them to your life, but involving your community in it. That's actually how you apply scripture, as being part of a community, a church, family yourself with your parents. Not that everyone is blessed with the relationship with their parents that you do, I think.
And not everyone, most of my friends are like, man, I'm not talking to my parents about this. It was just, I had cultivated over the years. I was like, okay. And it brought empathy so that they weren't pressuring me to get married, because they could see what I was working through.
Yeah. And similarly, I think, like, I realize this with anything, whether it's online or in person. Like if I'm podcasting or doing a sermon, sometimes I have a proclivity towards, I want to sound like an expert, which is different than offering good advice. You might sound like an expert by offering good advice, but if I truly want to help people, well, then I'll use whatever means I can. It's different, right? So when you're using the app and you're like, okay, what is my, like, obviously there's an extreme of the person who's transparent about everything and they're jumping into super sensitive topics too early. And then there's the other extreme of like, I'm just going to be a locked box that I'm never going to expose myself. So as you start to open up and establish trust, and then you start to, like, it gets to you because you're anxious. People are responding. You're building trust, but then you're allowing yourself to have some vulnerability. What's that doing to you? Do you need to take breaks, as you referenced? Do you need to, say to people, hey, just deleting the app for a month, maybe be back in a month. Sorry, because that might be worth it. Like, some people should delete Facebook for their mental health. They really should, or Instagram, or Be Real, or whatever app you're on. So I think it's complicated to create trust in this online world. How do you do that? How do you successfully meet someone on a dating app? What advice would you give, Ruth? Or Joel, because you've done it too.
Yeah, actually, Joel, you married someone online. I've met lots of people and had some really great conversations and dates out of it. But do you want to go first?
Maybe to add more color to how it actually played out. We connected, and we had some really good conversations, deeper conversations. We chatted a bunch, on the app. And then I was like, hey, I'm actually going to Japan for a month for work. So what we agreed is that, okay, well, put this at a pause. And then when I come back, see if we're still interested, and then we'll meet in person, and we're definitely interested through that whole time. I came back, and then we finally, arranged to have dinner in person. And, prior to getting to that point, to your point, there was, very thoughtful and engaging questions. And I mean, I think it varies by person, but I feel like our personalities match because she also was looking for a thoughtful and engaging conversation, right? Like deeper conversation. So I think, it's a self-filtering process where it's like, if you are looking for someone like that, and that person's looking for something like very surface level until they get in person, then they're not necessarily the type of person who's going to be very forthcoming and dump everything on you and be easily trusting, maybe, or something like that, right? So I think in that conversation, we affirmed to ourselves that we are alike, we do feel connected, we feel comfortable with each other. I think this is, a good decision to make the next step and actually see each other in person.
I would say, which I love that. I'm impressed you waited a month, because I was like, no, we got to keep this moving, because there just didn't have the time. I was like, we can keep talking. Let's keep going. The way most of the people I know and how I hear people talk about it, and what my practice was I'd meet someone. If the conversation kept going. Like it wasn't a slog. She'd be like, and how are you? And what did you do today? And like they could banter, they could have some fun. You'd like text for a couple days and then like, let's get on a phone call, because I want to get to know you outside of, and taking the pressure off of like, I need to marry this person. It was like, I'm just here meeting interesting people, asking interesting questions, and being curious about the people I'm getting to know. So it wasn't about, I think originally I would do more of that screening. And then towards the end, I was like, this is a numbers game, and not out of desperation, just out of like the sheer volume of people online. That honestly, that's what kept my head hopeful, was because there was a lot of no thank yous. What I said, and a friend said to me, is if you're only compatible with 3%, going online only makes your geography bigger. And so we're having to navigate through even more to say there's a lot more that you're not compatible with, that you have to swipe through to get to the ones that you are. And so I wanted to know quickly, are we on the same page or are we not on the same page? And in a nice, polite way, like, okay, let's keep going. You can keep going to your person, because they're filtering me out as much as like the profiles I was offended with. I had to be like, okay, man, like I am not your gaming girlfriend just because you're dressed in a Halo outfit and that's your profile picture. Like, not for me, thanks. And so like got on them. They're looking for a specific type of woman. And so what I do is we'd chat for a couple of days, we'd have a phone call. And then if that was going well, if we were locally close enough, then I'd meet for a walk. And then we'd start talking from there. And then usually within a couple weeks of conversation, if not by the walk or the phone call, I got a sense of like, this move forward, we're on the same page, or no, it's not going anywhere.
And you described something there that I think is counterintuitive. You're using a dating app, but then once you start meeting people, you aren't necessarily like putting all the burden on this potential for marriage. You're okay for it to function within perhaps a friend space. Like people understand that you can have friends with people of the opposite sex. I mean, Jesus did it. We should be okay with it, guys. Come on. Like, I still agree with the Billy Graham rule to some extent. You can Google search the Billy Graham rule and then see a bunch of angry people talking about it. But you can have boundaries, but still make friendships with people of the opposite sex. And that's what a dating app can do for you. And that's okay to be in a, not the friend zone, because that has different connotations, but you know what I mean? Like, you're friends. That's what you're doing. It's good to get to know people. Cool that there's other Christians, right? And
like, there's so many interesting people out there. Like you just get to know, like, what does that career sound like? That sounds really amazing. What's this career? Like, there's just such a wealth of people out there that you like, if you have your criteria of, I will marry this career and they must be a musician and they must do these things. Like, what if you actually really get along with, I don't know, an engineer who does music on the side? Like, there's so many parameters. And this really came from Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a book called How to Get a Date Worth Keeping, which is a horrible title. Because when I bought the book, I was like, no one will ever know I've read this. I will throw it away or burn it. Like, absolutely not. But it was so good that I now tell everyone to read it, because he talks through like, guys, get out of your heads. This is like, you need to get used to meeting people. You need to get used to having a conversation. This isn't, when we put all the pressure on like, this next person needs to be the one, then it becomes very stressful. Then your identity's on the line. If they say, hey, it's not for me, then you're like, oh, I'm not going to marry anyone all of a sudden. Like you take it in an entirely different weight versus like, hey, we're getting to know each other. You seem really fun. This is great, but I'm not clicking in this way, or our values aren't quite aligned. I enjoyed my time. Let's keep going. And respect for our mutual interests in finding a partner, and also being friendly and honoring to each other.
Because if you put all that pressure on yourself early on, or at any point, it might not happen. It might happen. And this is where, as a Christian, you need to function in any relationship, even with your actual spouse. If they become God to you and they are your only source of affirmation and respect, and your sense of self-worth only comes from that individual, you're bound to fail. They are not perfect. They are not God. The only person who can give you perfect love is God. And we can only get that affirmation that is fully secure eternally from him. And so as you approach relationships, regardless of whether it's in the dating context, but especially as we think about these dating apps, like, you need to remind yourself of that. At least I would, because I found that in in my dating days, and I still find that today. It's so easy to let other people control whether or not you're having a good or bad day, right? Oh, they didn't respond to me. I worked in sales. Those were highs and lows in sales. And I feel like the way you described the numbers game, that's what we describe in sales. It's the same thing. So it's a funnel.
No, I do think it's a numbers game. And I have been, I guess, after I started to look into dating apps and stuff for this podcast. I don't know if it's just how my brain works. I'm like, what's the next technological step? Like, what should we do next? And it's like, I think AI matchmaking definitely solves and like brings in different elements that we have kind of lost by moving to self-selecting dating apps. And what I mean by that is like, Ruth kind of had her parents or other people to kind of like bounce ideas off. So if you had someone who like knew you more intimately, and not everyone has their parents, like for example, my parents, they, without my even like permission or knowledge, they put me on like a dating web, and then like we're like bringing people to me and being like, yeah, like it's very common. You like go on this website and you feel like all these other girls or guys from your church are on. They don't know their parents put them on too.
Oh my gosh.
It's like,
that's a whole other culture. But there's movies about that now. And like the culturally it's well known that the parents are putting both their kids are on, but their definition of their children are very different than the actual child.
Right. So my parents would show me something and I'd be like, this is not what I want. And my dad, I think he got really frustrated with me at one point. He's like, what, Joel, do you want to marry someone who can climb mountains? And I'm like, yes, I do. Like, that is what I actually want. And, me and my wife have gone and climbed a couple of mountains in our time. So I think it was like, what I guess the point I'm getting at is like the AI or someone else would be able to like know me and my preferences better and like help with that numbers game. And actually like, maybe I would say I want this, but they'd be able to recommend something to me and like actually like have better insights than, and we're kind of there with the algorithms, but AI is kind of like just like putting that to the next level where it's actually like considering more nuances about you in like making those decisions.
There is one app, I think it's Coffee Meets Bagel. I don't know if it's still running, but it goes off of your Facebook friends. So it gives you people that would be within your network. So your friends are friends with these people, which we also have like thousands of friends from years ago that we've never like curated, but it gave me a more piece to be like, okay, there's a good chance. Well, actually both, like I was more than secretive and be like, oh my gosh, what if they're talking to my friends about this back when I was ashamed of being online dating. But then there's the other part of like, okay, if I need to, I can go cross-reference their character with someone. Because that it is still nerve-wracking that and I have a friend that's just that I can't imagine dating someone online because I never get to observe them in their natural environment. Like, when you see someone in church or in a social setting, you can see how they handle themselves around someone else. The fact that you can't do that before hanging out with them for the first time is very nerve-wracking for quite a few people, and it's just not for them.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, who's going to vouch for your trust, right? And like the matchmaker paradox, you have someone saying like, yeah, I know the other person on the other side. So like, there's an element of trust rather than a complete stranger.
I think that dating technology is going to be far more difficult because of the complexities. And like I worked at a tech company that specialized in hiring software, algorithms for hiring. There's a lot of good industrial organizational psychologists who do tons of research, and they can predict whether or not someone's a good fit in a job decently well. I mean, there's still a pretty massive margin of error, but like there's positive correlations up to 0.3, 0.4% with some of these technologies that, ask the applicant to do a survey, ask the employer to do a survey. That's what my company did. And there's plenty of them, but my company that I worked at was obviously the best. Plum, go buy from them, blah, blah, blah. There's my pitch, always a salesperson. But for dating, because I talked to a number of expert psychologists about this, dating is far more difficult. There's not proven research. eHarmony has tried to publish their own research, presenting their findings. And they're like, yeah, we have correlations, but they're weak correlations. And ultimately, there's such a high variability that I think Ruth's point of it's a numbers game, you got to like try new people. You got to try people that you don't think you might be interested in. Like my wife and I have complete opposite personalities. Any personality survey, we're opposites. And it's like, well, doesn't that suck because you can't be like extroverted together? And it's like, yeah, that gets frustrating every once in a while. But isn't it great that I get to go out, have an extroverted night with the boys, and then she gets a nice quiet night at home, and we're both like exceptionally fulfilled at the end of it, and she actually grounds me because I'm this guy who's like, yeah, I'm going to start a podcast. And she's like, what good is that? You should meet with like so-and-so one-on-one and encourage him. And it's like such a healthy balance for me so that I don't end up, getting back to where's your heart at. I could really indulge in a lot of terrible things for me, but my wife keeps me grounded. And so that's what my point is, that just get out there, get on the apps, meet new people, treat them as friends, use the curiosity approach that Ruth talked about. And, maybe good things happen like happened with Joel.
Yeah. And I think there's some interesting secular people that are talking about this. Like Esther Perel is a relational psychologist. And it was so interesting what you were saying there, Andrew, because she says we've created, like before, if you interview, Aziz Ansari's wrote a book called Modern Romance, which is, I'd say, decently good. Towards the end, it was like, oh, I don't need that. But the beginning was interesting. And they interview people in seniors' homes and say, like, how did you meet your spouse? And they met them because they were around the corner, seemed kind, made a good income, and the person was ready to leave the home. And so there was an entirely different category where now Esther Perel says you need someone that can be emotionally fulfilling, sexually arousing, of like adventurous with you, like exciting, but also very safe. And like we have this juxtaposition of a human that we've then said, like, you need to be everything. And if you're not this on my one profile, I'm swiping right past you, instead of giving someone the chance of getting to know them, being curious about them, seeing if it's the right combination, and identifying, like as Henry Cloud goes through this, is like, what are you looking for and why are you looking for it? Like, is it something in you that you're actually trying to overcompensate for, instead of being like, and you're just like, I need someone that will solve all of these problems because you're not going to God, your identity's not in God, or you're dealing with your own trauma and healing, and understanding that the way we've warped it in the world and culture in the last 50 years, we've changed what we look for in a spouse and put an entire world like burden on that partner, and just said, you need to be everything to me, instead of being like, God will be this, my community will support here, my family is going to be involved here. Like, it used to be a bigger landscape of what we were using to fill ourselves with.
Yeah, I think some people, they're too restrictive in their criteria, for sure. Like I even think the physical attraction piece is so overrated because it's such a cultural thing. Like, yeah, some people would say you need to have that, absolutely, but some people can grow more attractive to you over time, like as you get to know them. There's studies that prove this. If you stare face to face with someone for, like, they did it for 5 minutes and assess their beauty or handsomeness or whatever criteria versus someone you just meet, the person you stare at longer, you appreciate more. There's like the familiarity bias that kicks in. And so there's just all these things that can work towards you ending up with someone that you love. And guess what? The person you marry and how they look, they're not going to look that way in 10 years. Absolutely not. Yeah. So if your criteria is like a 22-year-old, whatever, boy, girl, fit, this, that, sorry, that's going to change. Like, you're going to have kids, you're going to get old, all this stuff's going to happen. Tim and Kathy Keller, they talk about different dating techniques in one video. I'll link to it. One of the things I thought they do that is helpful is they speak about, can you solve problems with this person? That should be a key criteria in your dating approach. And so, it's not just about, do they fulfill me, but can you work on something together that's external to you and build a relationship that way? Like when they hear about, oh, Ruth, you volunteer at Faith Tech, and maybe that's where you get involved and you do something together. That'd be really cool, right? Yeah. Or it's whatever it is, you do something together for the good of others. I think that's beautiful, because that's what a Christian marriage functions as. It's for the good of others, whether kids, if God allows that or not, or if that's, but or in other ways, you exist as a reflection, as Ephesians 5 talks about, as Christ in the church, which is about a self-giving relationship, not about self-fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. My husband and I had a moment a little while ago, and I was like, what do we have in common? Like, and realizing like our interests, like our side hobbies, like he's big into volleyball and video games and violin, and I love reading and learning, and like, not that he doesn't like those things, but it was like, actually what we have, that's what really unites us, is our shared values, our shared faith, and our approach to how we do life together, and our approach to how we solve problems. And I remember asking the same question to my parents, and they were like, yeah, it's our faith and it's our values and how we function as a team, as opposed to like, hey, we really love to play volleyball every Friday night. I started to, and when I was researching my articles, I started to like politely ask guys about their online dating experience while I was getting to know them. And one guy was really helpful, and like, just we became good friends, and or we were very interested, and then decided to stay friends. And he showed me his app, and he was saying he has to navigate whether or not it's a bot or not. And I'd never had that problem. And then, and he's like, I was like, well, then how do you tell? And he's like, the way they talk to you, the way they look, it's too perfect. And then he's like, the apps are creating, I don't know if this is helpful, but the apps are creating bots to try, and there are less women on these apps than there are men. And so they're trying to balance that out.
Because it drives addiction to the app, right? It can be just yet another app that drives your addiction. The one thing we haven't talked about that I think is helpful to think through is the ability to make everything easier, more efficient, more economical. Like, you're not spending money on going to a bar because you can just download the app and use it for free. At least most of them you can use for free. Some of them trick you into paying after you create your profile and things like that, but mostly are free. And so it's like leveraging this ease of access, which I think is great. But then at the same time, that can kind of set up this ease of introduction. And then that step, as Ruth, you mentioned earlier, that first in-person meeting is so overwhelming. And like, in any new interaction with a human being, there's going to be awkward elements of it. There's going to be elements that it takes work to figure out where the conversation goes. Like, I'm an extrovert, but those 15 minutes after the church service where I'm like, I'm a church person, I want to chat with people, but man, how do I do this well? Like, I struggle with that. And that's just in this nice shared environment of shared values. But in all circumstances with new people, there's going to be an awkwardness, and don't get so caught up in the ease of texting that it becomes difficult to make that, somewhat insurmountable to people step of going to in person.
I was just going to say to what you were saying was, when I would meet with someone in person or on the phone, I would intentionally think to myself, you are going to be relaxed, because my dad had always said to me, people want to be around people that relax them. So even though I was nervous, my goal was to present a relaxed persona. And that meant that I'd laugh quickly to whatever they're saying, and not fake laugh. Like, I wasn't just like humoring every single thing they said and laughing uneducated. Like, I was laughing, but I wasn't making them work for it as hard as I would if I was like unimpressed with them. And then I had grace for the social awkwardness, because there are quite a few people that don't know how to interact with someone in face-to-face anymore. So I was intentionally, the first couple conversations, within reason, I'd be like, okay, it's our first interaction, we're still getting our footing. And then, so I'd laugh easy, I was trying to intentionally be relaxing, and I'd come with a lot of questions. And so, because I know people relax when they talk about themselves. So what questions can I ask that get them talking about themselves? And then I was paying attention to, though, if they reciprocated and asked me questions. And that was something that I weighed when I was deciding if we wanted to keep hanging out beyond that. But it was something that I paid attention to and intentionally came into the conversation as, this is just a conversation. I'm here to ask questions. I'm here to be relaxed with this other person. Let's see what fun we can have.
It's a good approach. And to your point earlier, when you also include the values piece into it, because that's essential as Christians, and that goes a long way too.
But you can't always ask those up front. Like, sometimes I would have an inkling, and then I would, like 3 dates in, be like, okay, let's start talking through the rest of the values. Because it depended, though. Like, some people I was much more upfront with a lot faster.
Oh, okay. You just were listening to a Joel Osteen sermon. Great. Okay. Interesting. Great. Oh, okay. another thing to talk about now. Like how
Yeah.
you get into the prosperity gospel on the first date. I don't know. Maybe you do.
It's happened.
It certainly could. Well, final thoughts for the person who is nervous about using the dating app. They're nervous. And they're about to install it. They've searched it on their phone right now. And now they turn to you, Ruth, for final words of wisdom, which, and your name, by the way, is based around a woman who pursued a man biblically, right? Like
Pretty
a woman who took initiative. Yeah, very aggressively. We won't go into the ethics of that. But what would you say to a nervous person that's ready to download the app but isn't sure?
I think gather a community around you, and do this with partnership, because there's going to be good days and bad days. It's a numbers game. There's going to be a lot of people that you're not interested in, and then a few people that you are. And I think always, when you're writing your profile, have people help you. I have someone help take your picture so that it's not a selfie or a mirror picture. Figure out, there's a lot of men that take pictures from their chest up to their chin, or don't include the face in their profile picture. Take some time on your profile, have someone support you with that. That's not a bad thing to ask for help with. And then be curious, ask questions, think through your values, what you want to filter based off of versus what you want to assess out in a conversation when you want to talk about different things. And the goal is really to have fun, meet people. It's not about every single person you're swiping on is being like, well, not marrying him. It's like, I'm getting to know people so that once I've gotten to know them, we can decide if we want to keep moving forward towards marriage. And I think God can there are tons of stories that come from God and interacting and bringing people together on dating apps. There are tons of stories of dating apps making connections to other people that are in, you might have a connection online that then you meet the friend, and that's the person you end up dating. And that's okay too. God can use technology. He's not afraid of it. And I've met some really wonderful people online.
Cool. Well, this has been What Would Jesus Tech? Figuring out how to use technology in a Christian way. And it's not easy, but it's fun. It really can be fun. So good on you for those who are using dating apps and want to pursue marriage. No shame on those who choose not to because of the potential anxieties or whatever else that comes with it. This is WWJT. I'm Joel.
I'm Andrew.
I don't know why I did that, but use tech, find rest, and glorify God. Take care.